Hello, everyone. Welcome to this lovely panel. Thank you for taking the time away from all the distractions around us to be here with us right now. Without further ado, hello, my name is Vlad Micu. Welcome to this lovely panel at the Legal Summit. I'm celebrating my 10th year coming to Poland, and it's lovely to have you all here in this amazing community and at this Legal Summit that Michał and the Rymarz, Zdort, Maruta guys are organizing. We have an amazing, well, I should say, manel. We have a diverse manel here. Let's just clarify. We've tried, we've done our best, and we will do better next time. But for now, we do have a very diverse perspective on this topic. Gentlemen, without further ado, I'd love to ask you if you could introduce yourself in chronological order, and as we discussed, kind of give a short, perspective that you guys have had from your own experience on the topic.
Hello, I'm Tomasz Kordala from Rymarz, Zdort, Maruta. I'm dealing with competition and consumer protection law especially, and also with dark patterns in practice, which are very popular in the e-commerce sector, but also recently in video games. And in practice, we agreed that we will share something about our definition of dark patterns. So from my perspective, from the legal perspective, the definition is open-ended, and it's all about deceiving a consumer to make a decision favorable to a company but unfavorable to the consumer. And there is a slight element of fairness between. And there is the place where the authority and the judge will decide what is fair or not. And I think that this will be the discussion today, what's fair or not. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Micu, and I'm a game developer who's been building MMO games for the last decade plus. So my perspective on the topic of doing dark patterns is a bit more vague, because I do sometimes like them as a consumer and as a gamer, because I play MMO games. And there's a very big question: where do you start deceiving players? And where do you make cool content where you have loot boxes? There may be a dragon that drops a really cool weapon. Is it still a loot box? Where does it start? Where does it end? And I think this panel is very important to answer the question, what is actually a dark pattern that is very bad and should be definitely scrutinized, something that should never be happening in the video games, where people are just simply put deceived, and this should never happen, essentially, and we should make sure that there are proper legal frameworks that can actually address those things and make sure that people are protected, and the games can still be fun with some of the things that could be a bit gray on the area. So, thank you.
Hi, my name is David Greenspan. I've been in the video game industry for 30 years, working for some of the major publishers. And at the same time, I've also been on the academic side, so I'll approach this conversation from the academic side. I am actually the dark pattern in this group because I am not a celebrity endorser, and it was a bait and switch basically because there's some really good speakers here, and for some reason I'm on this panel, so bait and switch. I agree with Thomas's definition. I think that's how I look at it, is that a consumer is making a choice that they would not have made other than for this particular dark pattern, which can be done by a design, or it can be the actual content in on the website, so forth and so on. So I have a whole bunch of things to maybe talk about, but I'll wait for the conversation to continue later.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Andrii Biletskyi. I'm a game developer with 25 or so years of experience. Probably known for being creative director for World of Tanks PC, and as such being a very experienced practitioner of dark patterns, or everything that could be called dark patterns, for roughly 8 years till 2022. So my perspective on that, and I would be very much on Michael's side, I guess, is an intent, is that deception is an outcome of intentional design that is supposed to lead to a deception, or a deception in any form or take is a subjective perspective of a person who is being deceived, right? It all goes to maturity of a customer, it goes to education of a customer, it goes to us developers using a specific design techniques to achieve a behavioral change, and the nature of a game design is achieving a behavioral change in a general customer behavior. So was it done because I wanted to deceive and I wanted somebody to make a mistake to bring me money that that person would otherwise not give me in any potential situation, or the person perspective of me doing something is I'm licking money out of him while that person is enjoying giving it. So that's my take on it.
I am Nav, and this is my third panel, so if anyone doesn't know me by now, I've been in the industry a long time and on a lot of panels. But yeah, my perspective on dark patterns, it's interesting. I mean, I've worked in-house, in private practice, in law firms, in business roles, in management roles, all kinds of different things. One of the roles I had was actually working for Gree, a Japanese games company. I think Matt mentioned something this morning about gacha and CompuGacha. So the first time I got involved in free-to-play games, that's kind of where I guess this dark pattern issue arose, and that was like sort of 10 years ago. So for me, it's a consumer issue. It's always been a consumer issue. I don't know why we have to have these fancy names sometimes for things, but it's unfair practices, making sure we're protecting consumers, and is that deception? Is that manipulation? And also, who is the consumer? And children, as opposed to adults, have to be treated differently because, the choices they make and the manipulation on them is different from an adult, or potentially. So that's my perspective. To me, it's always been a consumer law problem.
And that kind of brings us to one of the first points where we'd love to hear from the audience in the process as well, because I think we kind of covered what we all already agree on, right? There's a certain, terms like ethics comes up, terms like deception come up, terms like, effectively the literacy of the consumer in knowing what they consume plays an incredibly important part in this discussion, right? So, yeah, what's a good question to ask the audience on this? I need your help, guys.
So I have, I think, a pretty good question for the audience. So if you guys are familiar with this gacha, CompuGacha terms, let's call it loot box for simplicity. What is the difference in your opinion, or is there any difference in your opinion, between buying a loot box for money that will bring you one of the random, very cool items, let's call them best in slot items for your player character, versus buying 70 levels in a game shop that will allow you access to a dungeon where a boss will drop you one random, very cool best in the slot item for your character? Like, are these two different things? It is the same things. Why one of them is considered a time saver that is pretty ethical, while the other one is considered something really, really nasty and bad and being regulated for about a decade, starting in Asia, I think first, and then coming up to Europe, and right now being very heavily discussed in States.
So who agrees that those two things are effectively the same thing? I'm not seeing, oh, okay, I'm seeing some green, I'm seeing some red. Oh, see, there's some division here, right? So that's a great point. So, Mikołaj, you've had this experience recently with hardcore gamers.
Quite a lot. So my answer to this is there's also a third option. So when you have a loot box or content that basically is gated with the meta progression where you level up your avatar and you progress through the game, and the progression is done through months or years, when you have loot boxes or content that is gated by making real money transactions, there's a very fine difference between having content that is extremely gated, entirely impossible to get to without spending money, and content that you can actually attain without spending money. So like the most hardcore pattern that I have seen in a game, I'm not going to call which one it is, it's like one of our competitors, but what they would do is they would release new spaceships, in the game every 6 months, and sorry, every 3 months, and in order to grind to get those spaceships without paying money, you would need to basically spend like $500, or you would have to grind for 6 months. So you would get them after 6 months, but every 3 months they would release a new spaceship that would be stronger incrementally by 5%, 10% from the previous tier, and they do it for 6 years straight. So this wouldn't be a problem if what they did is they released it every 6 months, and you could actually attain it. So the people who spend the $500 would basically be at a super big advantage for the first few weeks, but then the people would grind up, get it, and then everyone would be on the same playing field. And then after a while, you do a new content push. And that's how normal game companies do it. You know, we're talking about World of Warcraft, like World of Tanks. But if you just go full-blown, you know, dark idiot, you know, full retard, is a problem. And that's where consumers get really mad. And, you know, that's like a good example how it's a difference between a loot box that you spend money. Plus, when you have a loot box for money, it's no extra steps. You just take out a credit card and you can just blow through $10,000 really quick. Whereas if you need to do a few extra steps, you actually limit the rate at which a person can spend money. And in the end, it's a question, do you want to have a person spend $10,000 in 2 weeks and then quit? Or would you rather have a player play your game for 20 years and spend $8,000 as well, because they'll probably spend this much, but actually enjoy it over a very long period of time? And I'd always choose the second one. So.
And that's an interesting point, because you're raising customer loyalty as effectively a ethical reason to not to keep yourself accountable as a developer to not enter too many dark patterns, which touches on, Tomasz, your work with regards to how these patterns also are emerging more and more in our regular consumer lives, right? With regards to, you know, our online shopping practices, going to the supermarket and so forth. What can you tell us with regards to your perspective on these dark pattern developments?
Well, in practice, we have to first worry about the most obvious one, like the hardcore one. Because we can have academic discussion, what's especially about the loot box, what's wrong, what is not. But there are several examples. Like you may look at the Epic case in the US. This was very blunt infringement. So, like in practice, the authorities, the public will go for the clear one. You have many complaints about them to the authorities. So you has to first protect your company and your game to not include them. Mm-hmm. Then we'll see where the regulation will move. We talk about regulating dark patterns. EU wants to look at this and started the task to go through different services, including video games. So there's a gray scale, and I think the industry should first look at the most blunt one. Do not bother with the more sophisticated one, and I think this is the safest option right now for the industry. Mm-hmm. And the second issue, because if you talk about loot box, I think we should look at this at not a consumer perspective, but this is, I think, purely gambling issue, because most of issues are that there's a separate gambling regulation in each country. Mm-hmm. And loot boxes may qualify as gambling, at least from the perspective of the authorities. Yeah,
which most game developers, of course, don't want to have, because we already have that issue with, like, you've got the gaming industry and you've got the game industry. But you also mentioned in our preparation for this a case, and this might be interesting also for the international crowd, of Amazon actually getting a pretty big smack on the fingers here.
They have some charges from the Polish authority on some dark patterns in their interface, like hiding some options in the basket. Let's say the authority claims it's deceiving, misleading, and so on. Mm-hmm. So these are like, if you look at some pages which list dark patterns, these are rather the most obvious one.
Yeah.
not not the more academic ones, not about, for example, design of the marketplace, but little things like that which pops out on when the user try to buy something. And I think if the authority will look at games, they will also not first look at the game design itself, but the user experience, the store interface, especially when you have in purchase in the game. This is the first thing they will analyze from the legal perspective, not the game design itself.
Yeah.
And the Amazon case also shows that the authorities will first go for the big fishes. Like,
and talking about big fishes, obviously, David, like you were kind of in the middle of the U.S. when all of those. No, well, I mean, you've dealt with big fishes, but of course we kind of already raised the Epic case as an example of, you know, the combination of it being a very obvious case, is something that's easy to present and easy to you know, pursue, but also, of course, it being a big company that can be used to set an example for, like, okay, don't mess with this and don't get to this point, because we will legislate, we will, like, you know, fine you or punish you for these malpractices.
Yeah. And Epic was a great example, and they ended up paying $245 million, and that was part of a settlement that reached $500 million, because at the same time, they also had issues in dealing with children, and they violated COPA laws in the United States.
Could you quickly explain what COPA is for those who might not know?
It's a regulation in the United States dealing specifically with children's activities online and what regulations need to be followed, mostly parental consent, so forth and so on regarding that. So it's pretty significant in the United States. And this settlement with Epic for the $245 million was the largest refund award in the video game history to date. But things take time. And in the United States, this was done through the FTC, which is the Federal Trade Commission, which is primarily responsible for antitrust issues as well as consumer protection. And they used this catchphrase, dark patterns, and decided that Epic had been deceiving to consumers. And one of the reasons why it was triggered was because 1 million people complained about the practices of Epic. So clearly that's going to get the FTC's attention, and also the fact that it's a $185 billion industry. So one of the interesting things about this catchphrase, dark patterns, and the talk about it is it really didn't necessarily originate from video games, but may have originated from something else, because Amazon, Google, airlines industry, almost everyone seems to be in violation of potentially a dark pattern, depending on how it's going to be interpreted by officials. And in many situations in the video game industry, legislation is enacted to cover something else. Maybe it's privacy, maybe it's data protection. And it has a direct effect on video games. And that's where developers have to be very, very careful, and that's hopefully why they have good lawyers. So the Epic lawsuit involved the way in which players would respond to something. So I guess the screen was deceiving for consumers, and then on top of that, you're dealing with children, so it even makes it more deceiving for them. So the picking of a green button instead of a red button, and the green button means that all of a sudden they've committed to having to make a payment for something which they didn't intentionally try to do initially. And so that's what was part of the problem with the Epic lawsuit.
Let's hear from the audience real quick. Who agrees that the Epic lawsuit actually will benefit us on the long run as an industry? Yes or no? Who agrees, who disagrees? Okay, so yeah, I mean, if you didn't work at Epic, you didn't lose too much, right? So no, that's good to know. See, unanimous.
But developers need to be careful about this. While they went after Epic, I agree with Tomasz that they're going after the big players because they don't have the resources probably to go after every player.
Exactly.
But if there's a game company that all of a sudden does really well and gets a lot of complaints in the United States, then they may take a look at that.
Perfect transition to Andrii about that, right?
Well, actually, I completely agree that it was vile, because I wanted to clarify what exactly was wrong with what exactly dark pattern was, because what Epic did, they used a different, they used the same controls for say OK and cancel to confirm or cancel, and they reverted the same controls in a shop. So basically, everywhere in the game you were using X in order to say yes, but in a shop you used X in order to say no, and you were using whatever, square or triangle, I don't remember, to say no, and in the shop it was yes. So obviously a person who was supposed to make a purchase, even doing an incorrect input, was able to say, okay, fuck it, sorry, and redo.
We'll bleep it out.
And we'll make a purchase and go to play happily. However, as a person who was for some reason decided not to proceed with a purchase while having enough premium currency on his account and trying to cancel, automatically could make a purchase that was not revertible. Exactly. So this is, I think, this goes exactly into my definition, because I cannot imagine it is not intentional. Because like if any of my UX designers back in World of Tanks days do something like that, I would crucify him right in the office.
And let's be honest, it's a blatant practice that can be applied in any type of business, e-commerce, Amazon, whatever. I think we can all agree in the room that if we would experience that ourselves, we would be like, that's not cool, right? But one of the people who hasn't said much yet, Nav, I remember you mentioned exactly what we were just kind of going towards with regards to who the consumer actually is. And one of the things that came up in our conversation preparing this panel was, you know, the kind of analogy of medicine when it comes to these certain patterns before they become dark. It's like, you know, I think, Andrii, you brought it up, like, you know, a little bit of medicine is a cure, but too much of a certain medicine can also be poisonous, right? But like, with regards to from the consumer perspective, Nav, like, what has your experience been with this?
Yeah, well, I mean, let's try and keep it into video games. I mean, we always get, you know, sidetracked.
Detracted, yeah, that's true.
Let's think about video games from the start, right? Monetization and video games have gone hand in hand for years. I mean, when I was a kid, I was playing, you know, putting money into machines to play things like Scramble and Space Invaders and things like this. And so the game was made in a way to obviously be challenging enough for me, but then also to make money. So there's a return on that. So these mechanisms have always been there. When I joined Green, I started to get into free-to-play games. It became quite interesting because I saw, hold on a second, a lot of these things that are in the game are there to make money, right? And the question really is how far do you go? So in Japan, what was happening was they went too far. So for example, going back to this gacha mechanic, say, for example, there's a loot box, and in the loot box, you can get apples, bananas, and oranges, right? Those are the three items that you could probably get randomly, but to get a pineapple, you need 3 apples, 3 oranges, and 3 bananas before you get that, and so this rarity element, so you're starting to get too far, and that's kind of where you go, well, that's an intentional thing. So it's how far do people go? And who is their audience? And the amount of times I've had calls from parents, because they know I'm a lawyer, and they know I'm in video games, they go, oh, my child just spent all this money, can I get my money back off Apple? And so when you see complaints, that's when it starts, because people are complaining, you know there's definitely something wrong, right? So I don't know why it's even a surprise, so that's my perspective.
Yeah. No, though, I mean, those kind of things are to a certain degree emergent, right, in nature.
I was just going to mention one more thing about the Epic case. So people that complained about their purchase, when they would go for a refund, they were kind of blocked from actually getting a refund, and then their account was suspended when they complained about something. So it was a real mess, and I am actually shocked that it went that far without anyone within the company saying, this is an issue, we need to correct it immediately.
And we have to also remember that within Epic case, there were some input from the employees that there is something wrong. So there's not only complaint risk, which should warn us, but also our own employees. We all, I guess, heard about whistleblowing scandal in Being, and currently we are, at least in Poland, we are moving forward with whistleblowing legislation. So there's inherent risk also and a chance within a company that we can work this out prior to complaints.
Yeah,
and
shared accountability.
We have to, I think, take advantage of this also.
Yeah, so I also wanted to add 2 things regarding Epic and also one thing that Tomasz said a moment ago. So firstly, I feel that big corporations and any organization that has more than like 10 people in it, and if it has 10,000 people in it, it gets like significantly worse, has a lot of inertia and a lot of people who are either incompetent or they don't really care. And you know, it's like a question, how can a so well-funded company like Epic do something like that? Well, how can the biggest company in the world that has a budget of $600 billion a year lose nuclear weapons? Okay? That is a good question, because I don't have an answer for that, but it would be interesting to find out, and I don't think we ever will know. It's just incompetence and sometimes accidents and chaos that comes in. So also from the dark pattern perspective, I actually did not know this term before I got invited to be a panelist. And I thought it was like tricks or deception, but I didn't know the definition dark pattern. And what's really funny is that when we were supposed to have the discussion about this panel, it was like 6 p.m. and I didn't have it in my calendar, and I was at the store. And actually, as I was at the store, I was buying Cabernet cheese, and it was like, the one that I wanted to buy was bigger because it was cheaper, and the one that I didn't want to buy was on the right, but they actually swapped the cheeses together, so they mislabeled it, and I almost bought the wrong one as I was supposed to be in this discussion. So this is a very clear dark pattern, and most of those things actually come from real life because we want to relate to things that we understand, so things that come out of nature. So deception is something that's been a part of our civilization for the last 10,000 years. There's always someone trying to scam somebody somewhere. And unfortunately, this creeps into other industries, including ours. So it's really important to actually look at the definitions that FTC does, and as well as what happens in the consumer market, because we don't take things from video games into their real world most of the times, because, well, we do have gamification of a lot of elements, but it really goes from the real industries of like the world that we live in that actually is used to create our content and our features inside of video games, because we can relate to life, and it's not the other way around. So it's super important, I think, to keep that in mind.
Yeah, and to your point, right, like there's quite a lot of examples in video games where similar to when everyone started copying the Apple iPhone, they took the good design elements, but also the unwanted design elements because they were just in there. And I think that shared accountability inside of the company, like, I think we can all, like, okay, does everyone in a company have to have that shared accountability, except if you're at Boeing where the hitman was the employee of the month lately, but do we all agree on that? I think so, right? Yeah, no, people are not even lifting up a finger. So one of the things that I remember you saying, David, also was the fact that this is such a challenging thing for lawyers to advise on because of how, I think inertia is also a great term with regards to this, right? And the fact that it needs to be a blatantly clear example of a certain scale for legislation to be able to afford to do this. But I recall from our call how you also kind of addressed and to a degree, I guess, also criticized the fact that when politicians start writing the legislations, there can be both good but also adverse effects. And I think we already raised one example. It's where video games get treated like gambling. So what is your perspective on that now that we've kind of like mulled over this so much?
I think you answered it.
But like, could you give us an example of a bad result in the US, for example, that was an unwanted consequence of legislation that did negatively affect game developers?
Oh, I'm sure there have been a lot regarding that, but the fear is that, and we've all kind of discussed it by just saying what we all thought a dark pattern was and defining it. Yeah. So now you have politicians or people in the FTC using their definition or what can fall under their definitions, and it's really challenging for a lawyer, I think, especially a developer, to determine whether that is misleading or not. And I actually have my computer here only because well, I can't remember anything, but other than that, the FTC did an outstanding report on dark patterns, which is, by the way, is a catchphrase that was created in 2010, but it still maintains the same concept. And there are 40 things that potentially could fall under dark patterns, and I'll just give you a few. False activity messages, deceptive consumer testimonials, deceptive celebrity endorsements, thank you, false low stock message, false high demand message, baseless countdown timer. You've probably seen that. Only 2 apartments left in this building, so contact us within 25 seconds. False limited time message, false discount claim, price comparison prevention, roadblocks to cancellation, immortal accounts, sneak into basket, hidden information, hidden costs, drip pricing.
Who has a bingo yet?
Yeah.
No?
Hidden
Okay.
subscriptions of forced continuity. So you get the point that it's kind of overwhelming regarding all this stuff. And it may be that we actually have legislation already in place to protect consumers regarding these issues. And now we're throwing something on top of that.
Which was the point I was making before. To me, it's always about protecting consumers. And the other thing I think people forget about is, just going back again to video games, is value. So again, in terms of how consumers have started to consume games as well, it's changed as well, hasn't it? There's some people who've never actually probably bought a premium game, who've never had a disc, and so there's differences in how you purchase games and what people think value is. So for me, I've never spent a single penny on Clash Royale, but I've had so much value out of it by not spending any money. But for other people, they will only get the value by actually spending. Right, so value actually is quite important, but everyone forgets that. So when some of these patterns are designed in video games, game mechanics, surprise mechanics, some people actually find value in them, but it's at what point does that value become manipulative, so that, and then we have this concept of whales. I mean, why do we have this concept of whales? Because there are people who are naturally going to spend more money than anyone else in these types of games. And that's a deliberate thing that people have learned, that there's certain behaviors. And should those people be protected or not? So this is what this is coming down to. For them, it's value. But for legislators, it may, well, these people are addicted, this is bad, this is like gambling. But who makes that choice? Who makes that decision?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So as you touched the whale subject, probably, I don't know, do you know that or not, but in absolute majority, I would say 95% of all free-to-play games on the market, whales are making 70+% of all the revenue, while being 2 to 3, sometimes maybe 5% of the game population. So we're basically almost in a sponsored economy situation in that, from that perspective, right? The
Like
whales,
a patron.
yes, whales
setup,
are
yeah.
patronizing the developments that allow other people play the game for free, theoretically, right? And the other part, and I think during our conversations over the last few days, Michael brought that sometimes people are asking for features that are officially on the list, like David was just reading. Like, for example, leaderboards are considered a dark pattern. Badges for performance are considered a dark pattern.
Collection systems.
Collection systems are considered a dark pattern. Given a visible, visual elements that are supporting the fact that you got some certain achievement is a dark pattern. I mean, there is this website that's called darkpattern.games that is listing lots of stuff with explanation. So if you will go there, there is almost no game in the world. I'm not even speaking like mobile, right? I'm on all the platforms starting probably 80s. That is not filled with dark patterns, with a different concentration, and that brought me to a thought that Vlad was referring to about the medicine, right? Something can be a cure or something can be a poison, and it all depends on the concentration, on the dosage.
So I just want to say this thing that drugs are illegal, but there's a market for it. And I'm not saying that it's good to be a drug dealer or bad. But someone needs to move the product, okay? Because there's people who demand it, and if you didn't give it to them, they'd be sad, okay?
Or they'll find it somewhere else.
Or they'd find it somewhere else, or they do something much worse than weed, for example. So I think with video games, there's also the question of why do you play the video games and what do you get out of it? And if you have a person who is retired, let's say, and they have $100,000 of disposable income, they can literally go to a strip club or a bar and spend $2,000 in an evening, or they can spend $2,000 in a month and enjoy it a lot more and like subsidize their entire guild for an entire month. So like, I'll tell you a very crazy story. Not gonna name which publisher it was, but there was a game with tens of millions of players, and their #1 player was from Saudi Arabia. And he would spend $1,000 a day because that was a limit of like $999 in a single day that you could spend due to chargeback, like fraud and stuff. So he got really angry, and he flew to like Luxembourg or like Liechtenstein somewhere, grabbed his banker on a private jet, flew to San Francisco with a briefcase with money, wound up in the office of this company, and just placed $500,000 in cash and said, I don't want to buy money with a credit card, credit my account please. I want my guilds to be the #1. And they quit after a month because they had achieved the glory, they had no more challenge, and they all quit.
They kind of destroyed the game for themselves.
They destroyed the game for themselves.
That's a beautiful, beautiful
so
parable.
this is like the craziest story I heard with monetization. But I actually accidentally created the worst dark pattern that you could imagine in our tutorial in our game. So there was a bug that I never thought it could happen. So like when you have Clash of Clans in tutorial, you have this like spend premium currency to speed up your progress from 60 seconds to immediately. We had the same thing where you had like 50 premium currency and you had to spend 1 of it in order to just see how you can speed up the progression, just build your ship instantly. Yes, like a test, just to show how you can build a spaceship. This is how you can do it faster, all good. And this guy, I think, went to grab coffee or lunch or whatever. He comes back to the game and he tries to click build ship. And there was like a freeze in the interface where it wouldn't allow you to progress further. So he built 1 ship. He built the 2nd ship. He built the 3rd ship. He built the 50th ship. He got pissed off. He spent $50. And he built like next 30 ships. So he literally spent $300. He was a US soldier stationed in Ramstein Air Force Base playing on Congregate, who just had a few beers and started playing this spaceship war game, and he got stuck in a tutorial, spent $300, and wanted contacted customer support and said, how do we fix it? I'm like, what the hell just happened here? So I said, look man, you're getting like 3 times extra. I know you'll enjoy it.
Free QA.
If you want, you can have refund. He's like, no, I just want to play. So look, you're getting extra, like plus 500%. You deserve it, you know? He then started playing and had a lot of fun. And I think that's like, is it a super dark pattern? Oh my God, it's like the worst case scenario. And we didn't even know it was possible. We patched it up like 2 days later, but it was like a very crazy situation that no one would predict, you know? And it can happen. And I think that even in the case of Epic, well, there were whistleblowers. I don't think that like everyone did it intentionally. Maybe someone said, I don't care, you know, like what's the worst that can happen? Like, I don't have time for that today. Maybe that's just how it rolled. And, you know, if we haven't patched it up and instead of having, you know, tens of thousands of players, we had, you know, millions of players, and we would have 10,000 people who would spend, you know, hundreds of dollars in a tutorial, basically, based on statistics. So,
and to your point, you know, it was not intentional, but you fixed it within 2 days. And then the question is, of course, how many days did Epic let that go, or how much feedback did they get until they actually figured out, okay, maybe we should fix that. But we're reaching the last 10 minutes of our panel. I just wanted to ask if all of you wouldn't mind making some closing remarks. David, you've got the mic, so
Well, actually, I
feel
want
free to
make-
finish your thought and start with a closing remark, and then maybe we'll have time for like 1 or 2 questions. But go ahead.
I wanted to make a comment regarding development because I think that's a big issue. Are developers actively trying to mislead consumers in the creation of the game? And how is that particular issue addressed if that is reality? Now, I think maybe many, many years ago, it wasn't so obvious that those things were being done, but I think with all the analytics that are done today, the fact that games are free to play, you're trying to do all these studies on the players, are game developers now figuring out potential ways to manipulate, or maybe it's just happening by accident? I'm curious about that.
You want to answer it, should I?
So I think we both will. I completely agree with you that intention is the key, right? To Vlad's question, how many days Epic was fixing that? It's hundreds, right? Basically till the court listening hasn't been finished. The main issue here, in a way, is developers very often, especially if we are speaking big corporations, they are living in a corridor, there are our own buzzwords like being data driven, right? Being KPI driven, where management is asking you to increase your revenue by 10% the next year, and what you are doing, in fact, you're not thinking anymore about ethical or unethical behavior or being dark or light pattern. What you are trying to do, you're in a task-solving mode.
Results driven.
Yes, you're results driven. You have these numbers that are implanted in your head, and you're solving the problem, right? And we are humans, humans in IT industry are extremely efficient in problem solving, especially if the problem is extremely tightly defined, right? If I'm seeing, me, this abstract designer, if I'm seeing that having a confirmation window after a purchase is dropping my sales by 10% because this 10% of people are changing their mind in a very last minute, and I'm in a hurry, I'm time boxed, I'm under pressure, in the crunch, there is a very good chance that my solution will be remove goddamn confirmation window. Because it will immediately solve my problem. I will be happy, I will get my annual bonus, right? And go with my wife to Maldives. That's fantastic. So I'm not thinking anymore about all of the abstract things, and probably the people who are executing the things are never speaking with a lawyer in a corporation. They're not supposed to. Nobody of them knows about, like literally about the law department existence, never met anybody. So it is also partially it is an education of employers, partially it is an ethicality of the corporation management, of the governing board. It's much easier, to Michael's point, in a company of 10. It's extremely, extremely complicated in a company of several thousands, or on a project, because I was running something that was way over 2,000 people on a game, right? Where sometimes I never met an employee in 8 years. I never had a chance, right?
I'll make 2 points actually. So one is when I started looking at these games, free-to-play games and free-to-play mechanics, not from a legal point of view, but from, when I was helping to run this studio, which was set up just to look into this whole area. And the thing it was, we always have this funnel. I don't know if people have seen that funnel diagram where you acquire the users, you engage them, you retain them, and then you monetize them. And the funnel always gets smaller because, in terms of the monetization element, there were less people, which comes back to the wells. The whole industry has been based on this methodology. And so, and going to your point, yeah, people are designing these things. That's their role, and they, A/B testing and all these things that happen. That's happening a lot. And we had hyper casual, to another extent, but they started using ads to replace some of that. But when it comes to the pure monetization, we still have these mechanics. the question is, we're going to have bad actors who will intentionally do that. So we still need legislation to stop that, because I think that goes to my second point, which is it's the actual internet which is the issue. Because in the real world, let's just take loot boxes. You know, if a child is crying and saying, "Oh, I want that toy out of, you know, the gashapon machine,"
McDonald's.
yeah, or whatever. But how many boxes can you actually buy? You know, how many of those things can you physically? It's impossible. But pressing a button on a phone multiple times in the inventories limit, it's a completely different world. Yeah. And the same with who you're playing with, who you're engaging with. So it isn't just a problem of, you know, this particular area of dark. It's a problem entirely about the internet, which is why all the countries in the world are now talking about privacy. All the countries in the world are talking about, you know, dark patterns. It's finally coming home to roost, but it's taken all these years for legislators to follow, because people have moved online, and mainly because of the phone.
Yep. So I also want to add one thing regarding, are game developers doing this intentionally or not? We're people, okay? And it's like I had 2 presentations where I used a slide twice and said, people vary, you know? There's different types of people, and our society is very huge. We have billions of people. And if you look at the spectrum of the society, you get psychopaths in there, 1 in 100, you know? And they will have absolutely no comms, okay? Now, there's a chance that they'll be in a position of power, and well, if they want to go to Maldives, they'll have absolutely zero scruples around that. However, not everybody's like that. It's all about the community that we build as game developers. And, you know, I can tell you that there are large companies that do really nasty things, and I hear, like, executives talking, yeah, let's milk them better, and it's like, why do you have this approach? Like, make it fun rather than, you know, go for the full surprise mechanic route. Because if you make a great game, like, you know, Baldur's Gate 3, it's gonna sell, and you don't need any loot boxes inside of it. But at the same time, if you're making an MMO, maybe you won't have hardcore features that would be, you know, like, very fun. And it's a very fine line between, like, what is evil and what is fun in some cases, because some people want to have this hardcore experience. And, you know, to that extent, I'll say that the most, like, atrocious, like, thing I heard from a developer is, like, from an indie developer who said, like, yeah, and then we get the children's, and yeah, they'll get addicted, it's gonna be fun. And it's like, dude, why are you saying this kind of stuff? Like, why do you think like this? It's absurd. So it happens. Like, most of us aren't messed up in the head as much, but, you know, it's like the question, like, do we make a game that is hardcore, that's basically like virtual drugs? Because those games do that, and they are fun, but, like, our games aren't catered to children. And, like, we want to make sure that our games, for example, go for the people above 18. But if it's a child, it's written, it needs to be consent from parents. And at the same time, you know, if there is a kid who wants to drink a beer below the age of consent and their parents allow it, you know, it's not my choice to decide whether they can do it, but it comes down to the parents. And I think it comes down to consumer protection and actually education and saying, yes, this is not something that a 3-year-old should play. Like, I think that, you know, GTA 5 is a great game, but there's a difference between the, you know, story mode where you have, like, Trevor just beating people senselessly, and then the actual game where, you know, you just drive around. Okay, you drive people over, but this is just pixels. It's like cartoons, okay? But when you get into the story, it's, like, really graphic, and that's not something that I'd think that a 13-year-old should play. But, you know, what if the 13-year-old just downloaded Doom 2 and he beat it, and it's like, yeah, I went into your library and had fun. So it's
Interesting closing words. Tomasz.
So basically, Nav mentioned that we should somehow regulate it. I'm of the opinion that we have regulation in place. Basically, we have open-ended regulation in terms of consumer protection and in data protection. And basically, for example, in Italy, dark patterns were attacked from the perspective of data protection. So we already have these 2 major branches of law which allow the authorities to protect consumers. We have also many others like competition law, AI Act soon, and obviously the, DMA, DSA, and so on. There are some, I think it's even, you may call it over-regulation. It comes down to implementing them and how they will be implemented by the authorities and other officials. So basically, we can see in the commerce industries, and I see in practice that other e-commerce companies are trying to adjust, for example, to what is direct against Amazon, against Google, and so on. And so if we'll see some action against any company, like for example against Epic Game, I think that other, even smaller companies will not make those mistakes, and so on. It's like we already have structure to protect consumers. It's now all about implementing it, and I think we'll see in the coming years that this will be put in practice, and there will be some work for lawyers and struggle for companies.
May I add just one small thing?
Sure.
If you guys ever read Lord of the Rings, you might remember what Gandalf was telling Frodo when Frodo asked him why he cannot take the ring out, of power from him, and he said, I so heavily want to protect the weak that I will eventually enslave them. Right? So there is a very thin difference between summer camp and gulag, and we shouldn't cross that, I guess.
Well, that's one way to end the panel. So thank you so much all for coming. Obviously, we ran out of time for questions, but you can engage with the panelists because we have a coffee break now, correct, Yaroslav? Perfect. Awesome. Thank you so much for coming all.